Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the 10th edition of the Global Baku Forum. My name is Jafar Hasnan. I'm a presenter and correspondent at TRT World. Before we begin the discussion of our panel titled Building Resilience in a Divided World, Its Impact on World Peace, let's have a look at this introductory video prepared by the talented team of Nizami Ganjavi International Center.
In Bucha, we saw our humanity being shattered. The whole world is mourning with the people of Bucha.
What the people of Ukraine need most is peace.
There's no doubt about the primacy of the topic of war and peace. What does the global order need in our collective perception? A capacity to limit the ravages of war, and to promote peace and for the benefit of humanity. Yet the Ukraine war has challenged every aspect of our collective global enterprise. This war is about annexing the territory of another independent sovereign state of the UN. Russia has clearly stated that it does not care about a global world order in which it is not treated as a superpower. It has thrown down a challenge to the world, which requires thoughtful answers to a number of questions if an effective international world order is to be designed.
Now, we all have to choose between peace and aggression, between justice and the will of the strongest, between taking action and turning a blind eye.
Welcome to the panel, Building Resilience in a Divided World, Its Impact on World Peace.
In the earthquake zone of Turkey. I spent about 3 weeks there. So before we begin the discussion, I would like to observe a minute of silence for the tens of thousands of people who have lost their lives in Turkey and Syria. Thank you very much. Now, certainly the world we live in today has drastically changed, especially after the 24th of February 2021, the day Russia invaded Ukraine. We just marked the first anniversary of the war about 1 month ago, but still many questions remain unanswered. The first question is, when will this war come to an end? What can the international community do at this point to bring about an end to this war? And more importantly, what does the future hold for Russia and the West in the wake of this war? We'll be discussing all that and more as part of our panel. I would like to introduce our speakers for this panel. Ms. Vaira V.K. Freiberga. She's the co-chair of the Nizami Ganjavi International Center, and also she served as the president of Latvia between 1999 up until 2007. Thank you very much. And then we have a former Ukrainian president with us, Viktor Yushchenko. Please, yeah. And we also have Michelin Calmy-Ray, president of the Swiss Confederation between 2007 till 2011. And we also have the former Prime Minister of Norway. He served as the Prime Minister of Norway between 1997 and 2000, then again from 2001 to 2005. Kjell Magne Bondevik. And we also have the former Prime Minister of Slovakia, Evita Radikova. Thank you very much. And we have the president of Robert F. Kennedy Human Rights Center, Kerry Kennedy. We'll also be having a video message from a Nobel Peace Prize laureate of 2003, Miss Shireen Ebadi. But before we begin our panel, we have an esteemed guest, a keynote speaker, the President of the Republic of Latvia, His Excellency Egils Levits. We'd like to welcome you on the stage, please.
Madam President, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, we have heard this morning in the opening statements that the world is in the midst of polycrisis. Existential threats to states and to individuals are reality. How to build resilience is an open question on which we should find the answer here in this forum. And let me share with you some thoughts about. First, existential threats to states. Because without a state, an individual, being stateless, is without any protection. So the first level of protection of individuals is an effective state, state which is caring about the individuals, about the society. The states today are facing both external threats and internal threats. The most obvious external threat to a state today is a Russian aggression against Ukraine. It is already the continuation of the aggression which started 2014 with the annexation of Crimea, but before that, it was already the aggression against Georgia. And the response of international community 2008 was very weak. It was a little bit stronger, but anyway, weak in 2014. And it is now, I think, strong. Maybe it could be stronger, but it's the first time that we have an international community which is responding to such kind of aggression. Why we need to respond to that? Because there is agreement on international community since 1945 that a war of aggression is forbidden. It's a major achievement of international law. And now, 75 years later, we should not allow to lower the achievement and the standard which was achieved already in 1945. I would say that we are advocating the establishment of an ad hoc special tribunal to try Russia's aggression against Ukraine. It is needed for three reasons. First reason is, of course, justice for Ukraine. Second reason, as I already mentioned, it is necessary in order to show, to demonstrate that international law is functioning. Because the international law is the basis for world peace, and if we are not respecting international law, that means that we will fall back in military anarchy as before, as in the 19th century. And third reason why we need such a tribunal is to show to all potential aggressors that there could not be impunity, because impunity for a crime invites to further crimes. And we have seen this in Russia's case, 2008, without real response. 2014, again, with a very weak response, and now we are trying to respond adequately to this aggression. Of course, Ukraine needs much more military help, and this is first place, economic help, humanitarian help. But I would like to stress also the importance of judicial response. Because first time such kind of tribunal, ad hoc tribunal, was established in 1945. This is a Nuremberg tribunal. It was established by agreement between 4 states, only 4 states, but with a huge impact to international law. So we have to respond adequately also this time, when again, after the Second World War, we are facing with such kind of aggression. Of course, there are other threats to states. I would mention only one. This is a climate change. The climate change can lead to disappearing of the full or a part of territory of at least 10 or 15 states in the world. And international law has no answer for the moment to this question. What happens with a population? Will they be further also sovereign states, or how to help them? This is a new area of international law, and already in the last session of United Nations 22, we have started to discuss this question, because in the next decades it will become more relevant. Of course, it's only also a question of international law, but beside of real efforts to mitigate the climate change, it is also should not be forgotten. Latvia is a member state of NATO and European Union, and we are trying to promote the peace and international rules-based order, because I think it is a basis for good relations between all states, so that we can try to overcome the challenges, as I said already: aggression, climate change, and others. We have to address also individual rights. Individual rights is the basis for a resilient society. And we have seen that in the world, individual rights are threatened in different ways, also in this region, in the whole world. And Latvia is committed to human rights and individual rights by working closely with the European Union and with the Council of Europe. Council of Europe, in Council of Europe, we will have presidency since May this year, and our main work will be to strengthen democracy and rule of law. I think rule of law is also a challenge today to the resilience of the societies, of the states, because rule of law guarantees security for individuals. And if the individuals doesn't feel secure, also the state is not secure. And resilience also need rule of law, and therefore we will work to strengthen rule of law in all our activities. So I would conclude with a wish to strengthen democracy, to strengthen rule of law as the basis for a resilient society. And of course, international law as the basis of world peace. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, President Levits, for your remarks. And as President Levits said, the main idea at this point is to discuss how we can bring about an end to Russia's aggression in Ukraine, and that's exactly what we're going to discuss as part of this panel. A bit about the format. What I would like from each of my panelists is a brief introduction, not exceeding 2 minutes each, and then we will jump into the discussion. And since this discussion will be largely dominated by the war in Ukraine, I would like to begin with President Yushchenko. You have the floor.
Dear friends,
Дуже дякую за можливість
thank you very much for the opportunity to speak.
і хотів би своє коротке слово
And I would like to dedicate my brief introduction
почати з того, що дуже багатьох, безумовно, правдиво цікавить, як закінчиться ця війна.
And of course, the biggest question is how this war can end.
Ну, очевидно, нашою перемогою.
Of course, it will end with Ukraine being victorious.
Але не менш цікаво, чому вона почалася, ця війна.
But it is also very interesting why this war began.
Ми ж хочемо уроків. Ми
Because we
хочемо,
want to get lessons learned.
як зробити так, щоб вона не повторилась.
Because we want to make sure that
І
such
тому
war never
я хотів
again.
свій виступ і своє слово якраз присвятити цьому питанню.
And this is why I wanted to dedicate my speech to this particular subject.
Thank you very much. Ms. Radikova, you have the floor. Evita Radikova. Yeah.
Ladies and gentlemen, sorry, but really it's a bit complicated to hear what you are saying when you are sitting there.
Okay. I'm sure
Okay.
the technical team can help fix that.
Okay, thank you. So sorry, I know my name, I promise. Yes, still remember. It's a pleasure for me to be once more here and to have a chance to discuss. I know the topic is very hard, not only to talk, but to think about. Maybe I will open the discussion with very good news. Good news. The totally fresh opinion measures of Europeans, the citizens of EU, are very, very positive, because I have to stress today, and this is really totally fresh investigation, 91% of the citizens of EU totally agree with humanitarian support for Ukraine. 88% are in favor of welcoming into EU all refugees from Ukraine. More than three-fourths support whole economic help to Ukraine and all the stuff around economy. And last but not least, also three-fourths support to help with military equipment for Ukraine. Sometimes I have a feeling that our citizens are more clever, with deeper human dignity, than some of the political representation. So what we can think and have in mind all the time is that our citizens are open-minded, with open hearts, with open support to Ukraine, and they would like to see the peace with our support and help. And this is really positive message for all Ukrainians.
Thank you very much. Mr. Kale Magne Bondevek, you have the floor.
Thank you. The world situation is dramatically changing in our time. Europe was united after 89 and 90. The Berlin Wall fell down, Iron Curtain fell, the Cold War was over. But now Europe is divided again. And I'm afraid that we are approaching a new Cold War, not along the same lines as last. Another example is, of course, the increasing tensions between the US and China, and what will happen around the Taiwan issue. We are worried. How to build resilience in such a situation? My main answer, and it's very simple, some will say it's naive, but I believe in it. The main thing is to bring leaders and people together. As long as you sit around the table, you will not start shooting people on the other side of the table. You will not start a war. Primarily, we must bring leaders together in the framework of the United Nations. That should be our strong global organization. But we know that the Security Council is not composed for the current international situation. It was composed after the Second World War. It's outdated. And it's so difficult to change it because the veto powers want to keep their privileges. But we should not give up. It should be changed. It must be changed. We also need stronger regional cooperation. And for instance, the NATO alliance is crucial. It's more united than ever after Soviet's aggression against Ukraine. And it protects us as neighboring countries. Norway has a border with Russia. We are protected by NATO, no doubt. We don't know what had been the situation without. Other regional organizations as well, EU and others, and non-governmental organizations like here. I will also point to the role of religion. Religion could be a source of reconciliation and peace. But now we see President Putin is using religion quite opposite, to argue for war. And as a believer, this is really so sad to me. It's a misuse of religion. I will also, as the President said in his introductory remarks, mention the role of strengthening democracy, because from history we know that democracies seldom go to war against each other. So enlarging democracy in the world is really peace work. Let me end up this short introduction by saying, to solve conflict, we should, of course, use peaceful means as long as possible. Military means only when necessary, as it is now when Ukraine defends their integrity and democracy against Russia's aggression.
Thank you very much. Ms. Micheline Calmy-Ray, you have the floor.
Oh, excellent.
I think it's
we are
working.
living in a world of conflicts, of war. We are living in a world with a food, money crisis, debt crisis, climate change, migration crisis, and health crisis. And yet we are supposed to discuss here and to seek remedies and strategies to save this world in crisis. We are supposed to restore the world as it was before the crisis. In reality, defining what we are now experiencing as crisis is a misnomer. We are living in a period of change. The old order is falling apart, and the new one is slowly emerging. We are living in a period of change, of profound instability and uncertainty. That's why it is very difficult to predict what we should do to restore peace. Take the war in Ukraine. We are supposed to speak in this panel about how to restore peace, about punishment, about respect for human rights, and about respect for the integrity and the world order. However, there are states in this world, and not the less prominent states, that want a new architecture of international relations. They are challenging the established order. The international order appears in their eyes as a toy for the West. If it is correct to say that for the past year, the war in Ukraine has accelerated the mutations of a world threatened by fragmentation into areas of influence, it is becoming obvious that the United States is no longer the only superpower in the world. It is becoming multipolar, the world, a world with different powers, centers, and alliances. For a country like Russia, the largest country on the planet in terms of surface area, the stakes are geopolitical. Its most reliable access to the world is through the Black Sea, crossing the trade routes that connect civilization from Europe and from Asia. And the war in Ukraine is about preventing the establishment of an enemy stronghold, in this case a Western Ukraine, on the Black Sea. And whatever would each side put forward, the values, the war is not really a conflict of values. It is a classical interstate war whose objective is the conquest of territory and power, a war that takes place on the border between empires. And Russia is not isolated. It is supported from a part of the world that is looking for new relationships between nations. Their intention is to break the hegemony of the US and the industrialized country. And there are more than 3.3 billion inhabitants, nearly almost half of the world population. And a second remark, from a European perspective, is the war confirmed the dependence and attachment of Europe to the security guarantees of the US and to the NATO. And we would like that Ukraine win the war, since the Russian aggression is illegal and is unacceptable, unjustifiable. Our concern is, on one hand, to help Ukraine, but at the same time, it is to avoid a direct conflict with Russia. The West hopes to win the war without fighting it. How far will Russia accept that the powers that support Ukraine are not belligerent? It is difficult to say if and when Russia might consider that we are stepping out of our role of helper, advisor, arms supplier, and that it is in fact at a war with the US and not with Ukraine. And it is equally difficult to predict if Russia's allusion and references to its nuclear arsenal prelude an effective use of nuclear weapons. And speaking of peace in that context, it would be a good thing to have a peace treaty, to have a ceasefire, but diplomacy cannot be initiated if the parties believe they can win the war or if the conflict situation is not significantly painful in terms of human losses or destruction. And it is not yet the time for a peace treaty. We have to imagine, of course, a situation where the fighting will stop, and we will have to have a settlement that will bring long-term peace and stability on the European continent. A whole European security architecture must be rebuilt, a sort of Helsinki II. But we are not there yet. Mr. Putin should be able to pretend his special operation as a form of victory, and Mr. Zelensky, after the heroic sacrifice of his people, declared that it would not give up an inch of Ukrainian territory taken by force or by annexation by Russia. So, speaking of peace is a good speech, is a nice speech, but we are not there yet.
Thank you very much. Ms. Carrie Kennedy, you have the floor.
Thank you. Much of what I have to say is really an echo of what the president started with. I think we're at a critical juncture on the path to justice. To protect the world order established in the wake of the Nazi atrocities during World War II, democracy, rule of law, and human rights. What we do now will have implications for our children and grandchildren to come. That's why we are circulating, and I think you all have, a letter to the UN General Secretary Guterres asking for the establishment of a special tribunal on the crime of aggression to hold leaders in Russia and Belarus accountable for their crimes. Prosecutor General Kostin has heroically documented over 65,000 war crimes in just a year's time, 65,000 cases of torture, of rape, of targeting kindergartners, of bombing hospitals, genocide, crimes against humanity. But under the law of Ukraine, heads of state have immunity. So Russians and Belarusian leaders cannot be held accountable under the law of Ukraine, and they can't be held accountable under the ICC because Russia is not part of the Rome Statute. So the only way that they're going to be held accountable is if we establish an international tribunal on the war of aggression. Some argue that the threat of prosecution will prolong the war. But those leaders know that they're going to be prosecuted by the ICC and Ukraine anyway. And some have called for a special center for the investigation of the crimes of aggression. And that's a valuable tool. But then we must use that evidence to prosecute the perpetrators. For some people in this room, signing that letter will be very, very easy. And I encourage all of you to do it. For others, it's going to be hard. It'll be hard because it might be unpopular in your home countries, or it might put you at risk. I hope you'll think carefully about the brave, brave people of Ukraine, about everything they're going through. And remember these words from Bobby Kennedy about courage. He said, "Moral courage is a rarer commodity than bravery in battle or great intelligence, but it is the one vital quality for those who seek to change a world which yields most painfully to change." Everybody in this room, everybody here, everybody is here because you seek to change this world, to make it a more just and peaceful world. Think about that. Reach into your heart. Please sign this letter. Slava Ukraini. Slava justice.
Thank you very much. All right, Ms. Freiberger, you have the floor now.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We had the general framework about, do you hear me? It's on, is it? President Levits set the international standards of law and of national standards needed for human beings to be respected in their human rights. It is clear that currently what is happening on the European continent is breaking all these both national and international laws that have been set in place and signed by agreements with the signatures, not just of the first president of the Russian Federation that was created after the collapse of the Soviet Union, but also by President Vladimir Putin. who recognized the right of Ukraine to be free and to be independent, and he was supposed to be a friend of Ukraine and so forth. But of course, the thing that has changed in the meantime is that the president of the Russian Federation, as he consolidated his vertical of power in his country, decided that his mission in order to enter history at the same level as Peter the Great, Ivan the Terrible, Catherine the Great, and Stalin, as a matter of fact, who's a great hero of his, was to extend the territories of Russia even beyond its current borders. If you look at the map, visualize a map of the Eurasian continent, and you see this enormous landmass stretching across, from east to west across, 9 or 10 time zones that they possess. Here is a country that is sort of creeping along and wishing to annex South Ossetia, the different parts of Georgia, as much as they could hope to get. First Crimea, then Donetsk, and the whole Donbass, and further and further. And this is a country that has the biggest landmass that you could possibly imagine. A country that, by the way, claims that the war that they are now waging, and we heard Mr. Lavrov say that Ukraine attacked Russia, and he got, of course, ridicule from the G20 present, because, of course, it was the other way around. What happened in reality is that the greatness that Russia sees itself as having is at the expense of those who surround it. When we hear from Russia that the cause of their unrest and their desire to defend themselves stems from the undue extension of NATO, then we have an expression in Latvian that says it would make even a horse laugh, because it is so laughable as an idea. Because to claim to be surrounded by NATO when 6% of that enormously huge Russian landmass, 6% borders with countries that belong to the North Atlantic Treaty Alliance. Among this creeping extension of NATO, which supposedly threatened the existential survival of Russia, there were such great armies as that of our neighbor Estonia, who have 1.5 million inhabitants. You can imagine the huge army that Estonia could put and the invasion of Russia that it could undertake, you see, with these resources. Or our own resources in Latvia, where we are hovering, just below 2 million inhabitants. And yes, we do have armed forces that are up to NATO standards and so forth, but proportionate to our size. And it would be ridiculous to imagine that a country like Latvia could pose any kind of threat to a country like Russia with all its resources and its enormous size. It is ludicrous to think of us as being a danger to them. And finally, I am surprised to hear from Western observers and from Western Europeans that Eastern Europeans wish to destroy Russia. And of course, in order to have peace in Europe, you must have, well, Monsieur Macron wanted Russia to be able to save face. I don't know that they have any face left to save. I mean, it's gone. And that we should be concerned about their sentiments, their well-being, how to coddle them. But please think about the blood flowing in Ukraine and the crimes that Kerry just outlined that have been committed there. If we are to be pitying anybody, then clearly the shoe is on the other foot, and all our concern and our sympathy and our help and our aid should be going to the side who is the victim and not the aggressor. And when people in Western Europe, and any of you here from Western Europe, I'd like to remind you that Eastern Europe does not hate Russia and wish to destroy it. In many of our countries, because of the Sovietization and the Russification undertaken by the Soviet regime for like the 3 Baltic countries which were forcibly occupied and then annexed to the Soviet Union, there was intense Russification going on, and as a result, there has been intense interaction and intermarriage between the Latvian-speaking and the Russian-speaking population. So you cannot say that Latvians hate Russians when you have so many families where there is a Russian in their bloodline. And most of all, frankly, we would be happiest, I think, of anybody if Russians could be happy with themselves, if they wouldn't feel existentially threatened, humiliated, losing face, being upset, being unhappy. We would wish them every luck and happiness and prosperity and you name golden taps in their bathrooms, anything you want from their oligarchs. But please, 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 we wish for Russia to stay within its own borders and not cross them into neighboring countries. That's all.
Thank you very much. And before we begin our discussion, we have a video message from Shirin Ebadi, a Nobel Peace Prize laureate. Let's have a listen.
بسیار متاسفم که نتوانستم در مجلس شما حاضر باشم و در ابتدا مایلم تسلیت بگم به خانواده و دوستان فردی که در سفارت آذربایجان در تهران کشته شد. این عملیات یک عملیات تروریستی است که به وسیله دولتی که حامی تروریست هاست طراحی و اجرا شده. حکومت جمهوری اسلامی ایران نه تنها به شهروندان خودش ستم میکنه، نه تنها مرتکب ترور شهروندان خودش میشه، بلکه متاسفانه نسبت به سایر کشورها هم همین شیوه رو ادامه میده. جمهوری اسلامی ایران یک حکومت غیر نرماله که به قوانین بین‌المللی احترام نمیذاره. دخالت‌های ایران در سوریه، یمن، عراق و لبنان نشان داده که چگونه دخالت‌های ایران باعث برهم خوردن اجتماع اونها شده، نظم و صلح رو در کشور که ایران دخالت میکنه برباد میده. اما باید به شما بگم این رویه مورد تایید مردم ایران نیست. مردم ایران هم به خاطر سیاست‌های غلط خارجی و هم به خاطر خشونت‌ها و سرکوب شهروندان و همچنین برای اختلاس‌های کلانی که در ایران صورت می‌گیره مخالف حکومت ایران هستند و در این ارتباط از سپتامبر سال گذشته جنبشی که پیشقراول اون زنان هستند در ایران شروع شده. کشتن دختر جوانی در خیابان به دست مامورین حکومتی مانند کبریتی بود که به انبار باروت زده شد و باعث شعله‌ور شدن خشم مردم شد. این خشم قطار انقلاب ایران رو به راه انداخت. ایستگاه آخر این قطار سقوط رژیمه. مردم ایران شعارشون زن زندگی آزادی است. این شعار دو وجه داره. وجه مثبت آن نفی استبداد دینی حاکم بر ایرانه و وجه مثبت این است که خواهان حکومتی دموکرات و سکولار هستند. انقلاب مانند قطاره. همونطوری که قطار گاهی اوقات سرعتش تند و کند می شود، در انقلاب هم گاهی اوقات صدا زیاد و گاهی اوقات صدا آهسته تر میشه، اما به هر حال ادامه داره. انقلاب ایران تا سقوط این رژیم ادامه خواهد داشت و در فردای آزادی ایران که حکومتی دموکرات و سکولار خواهد بود، ما با تمام همسایگانمون رابطه دوستانه تری خواهیم داشت. دموکرات شدن ایران به آرامش منطقه کمک خواهد کرد و در آن روز مسلم بدانید هیئتی از این منتخبین مردم به آذربایجان خواهند آمد و دلجویی خواهند کرد از خانواده فردی که کشته شد به وسیله تروریست‌های ایرانی و از مردم آذربایجان معذرت می‌خواهند به خاطر دخالت‌های بی‌موردی که در خاک شما کردند. دموکراسی در ایران هم برای ما بهتره، هم برای همسایگان ایران. ما برای چنین روزی تلاش میکنیم و موفق هم خواهیم شد.
Strong words there by Ms. Abadi. So now we can finally jump into the discussion of our panel. I do apologize in advance if I have to interrupt. We're a bit tight on time. I want to begin with you, Ms. Radikova. You quoted some surveys in your introductory remarks. About 91% of Europeans believe in supporting humanitarian aid to Ukraine. 2/3 of the European population basically supports providing military aid to Ukraine. But the former Prime Minister of Norway, sitting right next to you, he says that Europe is divided and we're heading towards a Cold War. So do you see the contradiction here that perhaps is being exploited by some in Russia? It's for you, Radikova, Ms. Radikova.
Thank you very much. Yes, looking on the title of our conference, Challenges and Hopes, that's why I have started with positive news. That overall citizens in EU have such positive attitudes and are prepared to support Ukraine. But, and now I will start with negative news. First of all, as my colleagues have mentioned, we are facing the complex of uncertainties. It's not one uncertainty, it's not one war. There are 320 war conflicts around the world globally. Today, we are facing uncertainties of well-being of our citizens as a consequence of financial shocks, financial crisis, pandemic crisis, energy crisis, inflation, food insecurity, water insecurity, etc. So what we have to do? We have to give them offer that political elite, together with our other elites, is capable to answer to these shocks and give a response. This is our first duty. If we are facing, and we are facing, hybrid warfare, not welfare, warfare, we have to use totally new measurements and instruments how to support our citizens. Doesn't matter if in Ukraine or in Slovakia or in Latvia or Lithuania or Estonia, doesn't matter where. We have to compensate. Secondly, to give them the feeling of security at home. They are lost. They are totally lost. And it's absolutely not clear how they will react to this combination of shocks. And if people are in shocks, they have either fear or they are angry. With the same result, polarization of the societies. And if you have polarized society, you open the door for extremes. And inside the country, immediately, you have political speakers and representations of these extremes.
Okay.
Therefore, the narrative is one of the most important things at present days, not only because of social media, but also because we are facing narrative economy, narrative warfare, narrative of security, and narrative of solidarity. And if we only use empty phrases of values, we will not keep solidarity of the citizens, which we need as a precondition to stop the war in Ukraine.
Okay, thank you very much. Now, I know, Ms. Calmy-Ray, that you want to respond, but let me add one question before you respond. Now, as Ms. Radikova mentioned, that in order to address the hybrid war, we have to take certain measures. And when she says we have to, I assume you mean that there are measures which have not been taken yet.
Yes.
So what my question to you, Ms. Calmy-Ray, is, why is it taking so long for Europe to basically use whatever it has at its disposal, at its disposal to counter Russian aggression?
Well, it's difficult to answer for Europe, because Switzerland is not a member of the European Union. But what I wanted to say is to help Ukraine and to help peace, the first precondition is to restore multilateralism. We have respect from human rights, international law, and UN Charter is weakened on several fronts. And in legal terms, the most important rules is the prohibition of the use of force written in a UN Charter. It's not respected. If despite this, a conflict breaks out, the rules of international humanitarian law applies. That means the Geneva Conventions. This applies whether the conflict is deemed legal or not, and to all the parties of the conflict. International humanitarian law also protects in particular people who are involved in the war, but also the people who are not anymore involved in war. That means civilians, and also limits the instrument with which the war is conducted, and prohibit in particular methods of warfare or weapons. And significant violations of humanitarian law fall under international criminal law. But today, another question, no one ventures to ask for a modification of the Geneva Convention. Why? They are not respected. They are not anymore adequate to the evolution of new conflicts in the world. But the standards are contested. And it is a fear because why nobody wants to modify this Geneva Convention? Because it is a fear that the result would be a step backward in today's world. So what should we do? And when it comes to changing the body of human rights written in a UN Charter, or to reform the Security Council to be able to do something in the UN, then this is the elephant in the room. So what should we do? And one more question is the crime of aggression. The crime of aggression is not covered by either UN Charter, either the Geneva Convention. So we speak about building a new sort of a special tribunal to try this new crime of aggression. And I let you imagine what the chances of such a tribunal could be, and the definition of a crime of aggression could be in the UN discussion.
Okay.
They have the veto right of a permanent member of the Security Council. So the only way could be to build a special tribunal for a European tribunal, a regional tribunal, in the frame of the Council of Europe, for example. But no discussion have. So we are a little bit guilty also of this situation because we are not able to bring some evolution in the rules of international law, nor in the UN Charter.
Okay, thank you very much. I know that you want to respond, Mr. Bonnevie, and let me add one question here. Now, Ms. Calmy basically spoke about the blatant disregard to the Geneva Convention, and this is something that we have seen happen not just in the case of Geneva Convention, but also in the case of UN charters. For example, Armenia occupied Azerbaijani lands for almost 3 decades in blatant disregard of UN Charter, and now you have Russia occupying Ukrainian land. So, do you think the United Nations, as an organization, as an entity, needs to revise the way it works so that countries such as Russia start taking it seriously? Because, correct me if I'm wrong, whatever the UN has said over the past 2 years has been completely disregarded by Russia.
I don't think that the main problem is with charters, Geneva Charter or UN Charter, Geneva Convention, UN Charter. I do agree with what is said. We need a special tribunal for the Ukrainian war. And we need to strengthen the UN. And we can't come around that what is weakening UN today is the composition of the Security Council.
Yeah.
That's outdated. All know it.
Yeah.
But the veto countries don't want to give up their privileges.
Exactly.
That is the problem. And as long as that is the situation, UN will be too weak to act as they should do. That is a challenge. But back to Ukraine. I said that I'm afraid that we are approaching a new Cold War. First of all, what is most tragic in Ukraine is, of course, all people who lose their lives, all the suffering. But it's also tragic that Europe now is going many years back. We were on a good track. We were more or less united. And it's so tragic that we now get a new Cold War. And I can't see any positive outcome of this for a long time, to be honest. How will the war in Ukraine and when will the war in Ukraine end? That is a big question. And I think we all as leaders here, we get these questions from common people. When do you think the war will end in Ukraine? I have no good answer.
No.
Because I think that, and the former president of Ukraine can respond to that, but I will fully understand that Ukraine will not start peace talks as long as Russia has occupied part of their country.
That's it.
Yes.
We didn't do it with Hitler as well.
Right.
And Putin, I'm afraid that he will go on and not stop this war. Yeah. If something should happen within Russia, maybe, but not else. I met Putin several times when I was Prime Minister. I'm sure there are others in this hall also who met him.
Yeah. Sure.
And I have really seen a change. Because the first meetings I had with him as Prime Minister, to me, he was rational. I also said, I saw it now in all the clips from papers, that he was Western-oriented. I really believed that he was committed to develop Russia to be a democracy. And so he has changed 180 degrees. What has happened? What has happened? And now I think he's so committed to enlarge Russia, to strengthen their power. So I'm afraid that he will not give up Ukraine.
Okay.
He can't lose. So therefore, I have to admit that I am pessimistic. And this will go on and go on for a long time.
Okay.
I can't see a just end of this war. And therefore, I'm sure that this will develop a Cold War as well.
Right. But certainly nothing continues forever. Things end. Now, whether or not this war will end through diplomacy or in the battlefield, that's
In a way,
something.
it will end, yes.
That's something that
But
time will
the
tell.
Cold War will come back, I'm afraid. The Cold War will come back.
Okay.
I
I'm
think Cold War is already back. Cold War is already
that's right.
back.
That's right.
We have to say it openly. Yes, I have met also with Mr. Putin. I agree, he's very rational. He knows what he is doing. He tried to keep the power. He decided to do it in this way. And if we agree and close the eyes that, okay, like after Crimea, then all we are in the same risky. We cannot do the same mistake. We have done one mistake in 2014.
Okay.
And if we repeat it once more, then we have the same history as my own country occupied for 20 years.
Okay.
So this is really not the way.
Okay, and we're also going to discuss another
I
big
just-
factor here, which is the United States, because according to Russia, this is a war between the West and Russia, not Ukraine. We're going to discuss that, but I want to come to the former Ukrainian president now, Mr. Yushchenko, because we were talking about his country. Now, before you respond to what Mr. Bondevik said, what I want to ask you is, when you were in power, did you at any point think it could get this worse?
Я, мабуть, почну з кінця.
I will start from the end, if possible.
Якщо вам зручний такий переклад з української на англійську, ми будемо продовжувати так розмову.
If this format of translation is okay for you, we will continue this way.
Sure.
Бо тут є невелика проблема з перекладом.
Because we have a tiny problem, but it should work.
Я б просив би кожного, хто має можливість виступити на сьогоднішньому форумі, коли ми говоримо,
To ask everyone who is about to speak at this forum,
коли ми говоримо про перемогу, у нас повинно бути 100% переконання, що ми переможемо.
when we talk about the victory, we have to be 100% convinced that the victory is taking place and the victory is coming.
В Україні ходить невеликий анекдот. Як ви гадаєте, чи країна, яка виробляє 1,7% світового ВВП, переможе країни, які в Союзі виробляють 70% ВВП?
We have a joke in Ukraine that says that can the country with 1.7% of the global GDP win over an alliance of countries with the world's GDP of 60 or even 70%?
Відповідь очевидна. Ми переможемо.
Of course, the answer to this question is that Ukraine and its alliance will win.
Нам потрібно дві речі. Річ перша – солідарність.
And for that, we need several things. The first and the most needed thing is solidarity,
Щоб ми навчились говорити одним голосом.
so that we finally learn to speak in one consolidated voice.
Путін найбільше боїться солідарності.
Because this is what Putin is mostly afraid of, solidarity.
Тепер, коли ми говоримо про формат перемоги,
Then when we are talking about the format of the victory,
Україна його категорично бачить у такій моделі.
Ukraine sees it in the following way.
Перша позиція – це звільнення усіх суверенних територій України.
The first precondition is liberation of all sovereign territories of Ukraine currently occupied.
До цього не буде жодного миру і жодного перемир'я.
Before that, we cannot talk about any peace, we cannot talk about any truce.
Це слова, які говорить український солдат.
These are the words from the Ukrainian soldiers.
Це слова, які говорить пересічний українець.
These are the words coming from ordinary Ukrainian.
І військово-політичні лідери України.
And these are the words coming from military and political leadership of Ukraine.
Друге, очевидно, на порядок дня буде поставлено питання відбудови того, що зруйнувала Росія.
Number two is the issue of rebuilding whatever Russia has destroyed in Ukraine.
Я не буду на цьому зупинятися, бо хотів більше часу відвести на інші питання.
I will not talk about rebuild and reconstruction at this point because I wanted to focus on different sets of issues.
Третє, ми повинні створити візію того, що може називатися новий безпековий блок.
The third thing that we need is what I call a vision of the new security arrangement in the world.
Я лише підкреслю, у Європи повинен бути один безпековий блок, не два і не три.
I think Europe needs one security arrangement, not two or three.
Якщо ми хочемо не допустити помилок 2008 року.
If we don't want the mistakes of 2008 being repeated again and again.
І четверте, це те, що вже частково говорили на нашому форумі, на нашій панелі.
And number four, what has already been discussed and brought up during this panel.
Це міжнародний трибунал.
This is the International Tribunal.
В політики, і не тільки в політиці, але в даному випадку в політиці дуже важливі дефініції.
It is very important in politics to give proper definitions to things.
Дуже важливо, щоб ми говорили чіткими категоріями.
It's very important to speak with clearly defined categories and terminology.
Путін злодій.
Putin is a criminal.
Путін вбивця.
Putin is a killer.
Його місце, якщо суд гуманний буде, то в тюрмі.
And his place is in jail if the court demonstrates humanity to him.
Принципово важливо, щоб перша лавочка на чолі з Путіним, опитним оленіводом Шойгою, ну і далі були всім світом засуджені.
It is very important, it is the matter of principle that Putin and all his players sitting at this first bench of the tribunal are being properly judged by the world, including, for example, his commander Shoigu.
Але, будь ласка, не забудьте, що в Путіна ще 140 мільйонів таких маленьких Путіних.
But also do not forget that it is not just Putin and his military commanders. It is 100 million other small Putins responsible for the aggression in Ukraine.
Вони його легітимізують.
Because all these 140 million people in Russia are making Putin legitimate.
Це та сила, до якої ключі підібрати важче. Нам
This is the
потрібний
force that unfortunately it is very hard for us to find keys, proper keys to this audience, to speak to them and to address to them.
Але одне я хотів в цьому плані сказати. Ми говоримо про суд, і дуже важливо, щоб ми говорили про осуд. Осуд того суспільства, яке акцептувало путінізм.
That we talk about not just bringing war criminals to justice. It is important that we all condemn those policies, those principles that brought these people to power, people who are now committing war crimes in Ukraine.
І остання репліка в цій частині.
And the last thing I wanted to mention.
Якщо хтось із вас думає, що ви можете влаштувати життя своєї держави, своєї нації на кордоні, за яким знаходиться Путін і його режим,
If you think that you can build your country, that you can develop your country having a common border with Russia,
ви робите велику помилку.
and if you think you will be left in peace, you make a huge mistake.
В поняття великої перемоги ми обов'язково повинні включати кінець Путіна і путінського режиму.
Because when we talk about the victory, this concept of great victory includes victory over Putin and Putin's regime.
І хай 190 корінних народів Росії
And I want 190 native nations and
через
the tribes of
національні
Russia
рухи, через демократичні рухи знаходять ту формулу майбутньої Росії, яка б влаштовувала весь світ.
And I want all those peoples and tribes living in Russia, all those nations that are constituting part of the Russian Federation, to have their own resistance, to have their will expressed clearly in how they see the future of Russia.
Okay, thank you very much. So President Yushchenko believes in victory. In fact, he is quite determined that victory will happen, but the big question at this point is how? Will it be through diplomacy or in the battlefield? Over the past 1 year, Ukraine has been provided with an enormous amount of support by the West in terms of weapons. Most recently, battle tanks have been given to Ukraine. Ms. Freiberger, I want to get your thoughts. Okay. I want to get your thoughts on this. How likely is it for this war to end through diplomacy? Or do you think it will end in the battlefield? Because one way or the other, it will end. That's what history tells us.
If we even imagine the possibility of a diplomatic solution, I think that President Putin would first have to die, go to heaven, and be converted into a different man. Because otherwise, I do not see how it is possible. Prime Minister Bondevik mentioned that he seemed to be a Democrat at the beginning of his career. Shelmagle, I'm sorry, but I think that you were misled by his ability to play the game. And after all, Russia did sign all sorts of treaties, you see, including the Budapest Memorandum about respecting the sovereignty of Ukraine.
I do agree that I was misled. I misunderstood him.
He's responding and saying that he agrees that he was misled.
I was misled. I do agree.
Yes.
I see it today.
And I met him very shortly after his being elected. And the main thing of this meeting that we tried to have together in order to supposedly improve diplomatically, if you like, the relations between the climate between the two countries, is to say what a tragedy it was that Latvia had broken off and regained its independence with the collapse of the Soviet Union, because the Soviet citizens who went to bed in the Soviet Union with their Soviet passports woke up in the morning and discovered that they were living in Latvia. They hadn't realized that they were living in Latvia, don't you see? They had occupied it and they considered it was already their territory. And the idea that the Latvians would like to have their own territory to themselves was completely incomprehensible to him. I could see right away his aim would be to restore what he considered the greatness of the Soviet Union, and this is why he's in fact emulating a tyrant like Stalin and increasingly using Stalinist methods within his own country against his own citizens, because that is his idea of greatness. And as I say, anybody who believes that I sat with him, face to face, and I could see that dialogue was not possible with this man. And now when we have these European leaders going to Moscow before the war broke out or shortly after, and sitting at a 6-meter long table and sort of saying, hello, what's the weather like at your end of the table? And trying to call this diplomacy, I think it makes a mockery of what democracy is all about. But most of all, I'd like to draw your attention to something that Prime Minister Radicova brought up about the narrative. When you say that there was this vision of Russia feeling it is at war with the West, he is presenting it as a fight for values, interestingly enough. And I think for the West, or anybody who has any sort of democratic or human rights sort of principles and convictions, we really have to think seriously about the narrative that our populations, ours and our neighbors' populations, get about what is right or not. Because in his last speech, President Putin, I don't know if many of you had the patience to listen for an hour and a half to the subtitled speech, but he sends his audience to read the Bible, if you please. President Putin sends his population to go, and the Western world, to go and read the Bible to find out what a real family should be like. And he sees that he is putting himself now not just as reconstructing the territories of Peter the Great, Catherine the Great, and that Stalin had conquered, but he's presenting himself as a prophet and a savior. And he forgot to mention which part of the Bible he was sending us to for the family model, with the patriarch Abraham with his 2 wives, or Lot with his daughters, or what.
And if I may, very quickly, do you think he's succeeding in doing that?
Well, I think that his population, some of them are truly getting brainwashed. There are clips on the internet of kindergarten children dressed in camouflage dress and with little dings dangling from their helmets, marching in military lockstep, being trained for going to war and becoming cannon fodder for the fatherland. Teenagers, instead of getting their physical education, are pushing mock-ups, plastic mock-ups of tanks around their gyms and playing soldier. And the whole country, in terms of values, has frankly gone insane. And by shutting off channels of communication with the rest of the world, it's going to take a while for these people who have been hypnotized by the propaganda to wake up, and for us to have a dialogue. And I mean, a dialogue should not be just with the leaders. We need a dialogue and an understanding to live together on the same continent with the Russian people. Okay. And that may take time, but hopefully the Russian people at some point will wake up from this hypnosis of authoritarianism and mania of grandeurs and imperialistic tendencies, and be ready to live a normal life within a normal country and its borders.
Okay, thank you very much. Now, apart from values, that's certainly one argument that comes from Russia, especially when we talk about the war in Ukraine, about preserving values. Another argument that the Russians make is NATO, the expansion of NATO. Russia says that it perceives NATO as a threat to its territorial integrity and sovereignty. And I want to put this question to Ms. Calmy Ray. It's a very simple question. Does NATO pose a threat to Russia?
I think what is at stake for Russia, I said it before, is question of value is not put forward by the president of Russia, but what is at stake is geopolitical. It is for Russia, it is an access to the Black Sea, an access to the big world. It is a fight that is not in particular the fight of the President Putin, but it was also the fight of the Tsar, of the Soviet Union, to get an access. And they are not ready to have a westernized Ukraine being an obstacle to this access to the Black Sea. So they say NATO is a threat because NATO is united. NATO is led by the United States. It is a war between at the margin of 2 empires for power and for territory. And that makes me pessimistic. I mean, because it means a war, and not a cold war. I'm sorry, it means a hot war.
So you agree with Mr. Bondevic?
The questions: are we ready to be considered, the western part, as direct belligerent. For the time being, we let Ukraine alone. We let Ukraine fighting alone. We just provide arms, we provide support, we provide information, all things what you want, but we're not directly fighting. And now the question is, how long will Russia consider being in a war with Ukraine and not with the US and with the NATO? And I am really, in listening to the president of Russia speaking about NATO, speaking about the Western, speaking about how long will he consider that he's not in a war with the West? And are we ready to prepare to enter to a third world war? And at the end of all that, we have to discuss and we have to have a new security architecture on the European continent. How it will occur, who will win, nobody knows for the time being.
Well, if you ask Ukrainians, they will tell you Ukraine would win. And that's what President Yushchenko said earlier. I'll give you the floor, President Yushchenko, but I have to go to Ms. Radikova now. So we heard Ms. Kalmyre talk about the support that Europe has been providing to Ukraine in terms of weapons, but I think you have raised a very important question here. For how much longer would it continue? For how much longer can European countries within the European Union afford to provide arms to Ukraine? Because not long ago, if you may remember, there was a huge debate.
It is a question for me. I cannot answer because Switzerland is neutral.
No, this is for Ms. Radikova.
We don't export arms and weapons to Ukraine.
Yes, we know it, that you do not, because neutral state. I try to understand. I have a problem to understand, but I try. The problem is, first question, how long the war will last? The easiest answer is such long as Russian soldiers are in Ukraine.
Yeah, probably.
This is, for me, absolutely clear answer. So it can be closed and finished tomorrow. It's on the side of Russia. Second question, how long we can support? How long? Where is the moment of the Putin's words? Because he said, I will have a look how long you will keep your beautiful values under the pressure of decreasing of your lifestyle and standard of living. So this Moses dilemma, freedom or bread. And my answer is, look at the our citizens. They are, after the 1 year of the war, under the pressure of uncertainties, really pressure of energy price, inflation, all with these know, still know that they value their quality of life, their human dignity as interconnected, not only with their own state and EU, but Europe as a whole, and more, as a global feature. And therefore, they are still prepared until political representation has same will, power, and consistency. If there are representation, political parties who openly are talking with the citizens that we will keep our freedom, we will keep our democracies, and as a cost, we are prepared to compensate warfare for you. This is crucial. I repeat it once more and once more. And last but not least, I will stress narrative. It's hybrid also war, and it's war of propaganda and different statements. And
Who do you think is winning the war of propaganda right now?
Sorry?
Who do you think is winning the war of propaganda right now?
Propaganda is much stronger from the Russian side because, first of all, at home they have closed free media.
Okay.
It's clear. And concerning, they have created the farms of trolls who are distributing all the propaganda. And last but not least, they have their own farms in each state inside EU because trying to influence the situation in each country. So at this moment, I have to say, because of disinfo scene, they are much stronger than the opposite side. And mainly also because from the beginning we have feeling that it's okay and enough if we use traditional media to keep people informed.
Okay.
But there is mistrust, strong mistrust to standard media in the countries.
Okay, Mr. Bonnigo, I will come to you, but Ms. Kennedy has been listening to us very patiently over the past 30 minutes, and I really wonder what you think about the discussion that we just had, and most importantly, what do you think about how Russia can be brought to justice? I've been to Bucha myself. I was in Ukraine last month. I went to Kherson, and I remember seeing the place under heavy Russian bombardment. We did not know what to do because the bombardment was random. And I spoke to civilians in Bucha, and they tell me what they witnessed when Russia first invaded the country is something that they cannot describe in words. In fact, for me as a journalist, it was something that I cannot even imagine in my worst nightmares. So what do you think the world needs to do, the international community needs to do at this point to bring Russia to justice, to hold it accountable for what it has done in Ukraine, and most importantly, to the civilians of Ukraine?
Thank you for the question. So I think that there's a lot being done in Ukraine right now. The Prosecutor General, Andrei Kostin, has already put together files on over 65,000 cases. I mean, that's pretty extraordinary in a 12-month period. And all of those, I mean, I asked him, how are you going to decide which ones you're going to prosecute? You can't do them all. And his answer was, we're going to do them all. We're going to hold them accountable for every last case. So I love that spirit, and that's the spirit of Ukraine. So I think they'll be held accountable in Ukraine. The ICC is working. The issue that we are talking about here is specifically the crime of aggression, and I think the best way to do that is through a resolution by not by the Security Council, but by the UN at UNGA. And that's why this letter is about that. Incidentally, anybody who has that letter, we're also going to send you an email. If you could just reply to the email that you want to sign it, you'll be included in the letter, so thank you very much. I'd also like to address how this war is going to end. Is it going to end by diplomacy or by guns? All wars end with diplomacy. So this is going to end in diplomacy, but it's going to end when the Ukrainians are never going to stop fighting for their people, for their land, because they know, as Katya Yushchenko always says, that if they don't win this war, that their grandchildren, their children and the grandchildren are also going to be fighting against the Russians. So they have everything, they put everything at stake, and we see that by their spirit. And coming from the United States, I don't see the U.S. letting up for one moment. We've invested billions and billions in this war. Our president sees this, and our government sees this as a war not about a country very far away, but front lines of democracy, humanity, human rights, the world order. Everything is at stake in this war, and we are so grateful, grateful, grateful to the incredible courage of the people of Ukraine who are on the front lines fighting this war, not just for themselves, but for all of us.
Okay, I just want to get, before I come to you, I just want to get your thoughts very quickly on the US. Now, if you are confident that this is going to end through diplomacy, and that's what history tells us, most of the wars end through diplomacy, why do you think the US is adamant about continuing supporting Ukraine with arms and weapons? Because the more weapons you provide, the longer the battle continues, isn't it?
I like President Yushchenko's answer.
And I saw his
No.
response. He doesn't agree with that.
Все навпаки. Для перемоги у війні треба декілька речей.
Actually, it's vice versa. In order to win in the war, you need several things.
Треба великий національний дух і консолідація всіх, хто проживає у нашому суспільстві.
The first thing that is needed is the great national spirit and consolidation of all the people living on the territory of Ukraine.
Я вам гарантую, українці володіють унікальною консолідацією. Ми говоримо одним голосом, і ми тверді, як сталь.
And I guarantee that we in Ukraine today speak in one voice. We have been united and consolidated as never before, and we have the spirit that is needed to win.
І далі три речі. Що потрібно для перемоги?
And then three other things. What do you need in order to
Бо
win?
ми зараз говоримо про фізику війни.
Now we are talking about the physics of war.
Будь ласка, зброя,
Weapons,
обладнання
equipment,
і ресурси.
and resources.
Вже і все.
That is it.
Вся відповідь.
And
Вся
this is the
відповідь.
answer.
Чим ми довше приймаємо політичні рішення,
The longer it takes us to make important political decisions,
от тоді є більше шансів Путіну.
the more chances we give to Putin.
І ще репліку відносно НАТО я хотів сказати.
And one more reply regarding NATO.
Дорогі друзі, не НАТО йде на схід.
It's not that the NATO is going east.
Схід іде до НАТО.
The east is going to NATO.
Тому що ми в НАТО бачимо єдиний спосіб зберегти суверенітет і цільність нашої нації. Так як в цьому бачили відповідь литовці, латвійці, естонці, чехи, поляки, болгари, українці такі ж самі.
Because NATO is our only answer to the future security agreements and arrangements for Ukraine. We want the same what Latvians, Lithuanians, Estonians, Bulgarians got when they joined NATO.
І по скриптум. Ще одна умова є, про яку я не хотів говорити, але тепер прийдеться говорити.
And one more precondition that I did not want to mention, but I feel like saying it now.
Ми не повинні страдати синдромом Макрона.
I don't think we should be suffering what I call the Macron syndrome.
Дякую.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. We are out of time, but I have to give the floor to Mr. Bonevik now. I know that you want to jump in, please.
Yes, two brief points. NATO, it makes no sense when Putin says that NATO is a threat. Since it's my successor as Prime Minister of Norway, who is now the Secretary General of NATO, I must comment on that. It's no example from history that NATO has, as such, has attacked anybody. There have been NATO countries doing mistakes, as in Iraq, but not NATO as an alliance.
Very quickly, very quickly.
But
just-
the second point is we cannot end this discussion without mentioning China. That's a big mistake, not mentioning them, because China is the only power that can make the necessary pressure on Russia. But they don't do, and we know of obvious reasons. They presented a so-called 12 points plan And the interesting point in that was they talked about territorial integrity. But nobody has really asked them what they mean with that. Do they mean the original border of Ukraine? That is, of course, the key point. But the President Zelensky said that he was interested to talk with them. But nothing has come out so far. But we should make more focus on China. They are the key.
Indeed, and certainly we spoke about that everyone should be condemning what's happening in Ukraine right now, but certainly there are some countries which have decided not to do so up until now. And for example, one of them is China. Ms. Vike Freiberger, I know that you also want to jump in, and let me add one question to your point now. Do you think it's ever possible for Ukraine to become a part of NATO?
Ukraine at the 2008 NATO summit had asked for a membership action plan, as had Georgia. And it's because NATO refused to have them that Russia was emboldened and realized that it could go ahead, and it tried by taking some parts of Georgia, and then it took Crimea, and because NATO was not ready, did not want to take these two countries in order not to annoy Russia, Russia happily walked into these countries and occupied them. I want to answer your question when you said, what about the responsibility of giving arms to Ukrainians to defend themselves, because that prolongs the war. If you see somebody being, and you mentioned yourself the crimes that have been committed in Bucha and Irpin and everywhere else, if you are a spectator, a witness to crimes against humanity of the worst kind being committed, and you refuse to help the victim in the ways that are accessible to you, you become complicit in the violence that is being committed. So I would beg you to think about that. Anybody who feels that they should, the war will end if Russia is allowed to walk all over Ukraine and continue committing atrocities. You are then complicit in what they're doing.
All right. Unfortunately, we are out of time. I would like to take this opportunity to thank all of you once again for coming here and sharing your insights into the topic of discussion today. Thank you very much once again, and thanks to all of you for listening. Thank you very much.